Hello out there in podcast land. This is Tammy Terrell, Texas Desert Rose, coming to you for a very different kind of, podcast recording. I've done quite a few where I'm interviewing different people and getting their view and maybe discussing together with them our views on different topics. And I hope you've found them to be sometimes entertaining, compelling, and most importantly, thought-provoking, and maybe even inducing you to action about some of these topics. But I've had a few people ask me, well, what about you, Tammy? And I'm like, what about me? When are you going to tell more people about you, where you've come from, what you've come out of, and endured, etc. And I think a year later, after starting this podcast, Texas Desert Rose, I have been hesitant to do that because I don't really want to tell someone else's story without their permission. And so you'll find as I'm doing this show, where I am going to tell more about my life, that I don't really list names. I don't ever want to unintentionally hurt someone with my words. Absolutely the opposite is my mission with this podcast. But I think it's important that I get vulnerable and share a little bit more about my life. And I'll tell you what provoked me recently, because this is definitely very vulnerable. I have anxiety about it. Just putting that out there. Are people going to think I'm saying poor me? Everybody has their own stuff. These are all excuses for me not to get vulnerable and open about my life. And I have a story to tell, and I think it's going to bless people that have gone through or going through or may go through things similar, and maybe help them in how to cope with it. But my biggest trigger to do this was I posted something that I thought was kind of a foregone conclusion, something that I thought I certainly didn't expect to get a bunch of get reaction and get comments about it. But I posted something about, forgiveness. Forgiveness is about the past. Trust is about the future, which you'll hear me say that a few times in this forgiving. But it's not for the other person, it's for you. But for goodness sakes, forgive. And that really hit the nerve of some people, and some of the responses and comments were, I'm not going to forgive him. He did his blah, 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 blah. And how can you suggest that I forgive and all of that? And I felt this overwhelming desire to explain. There's so much more to this, and I don't want to wait until one by one I see people in my counseling sessions. I want to go bigger scale. That's why I feel motivated to do, this podcast, is I want to reach the masses. And even if you don't agree, which is okay, at least we're talking about it, right? I'd love to hear from you. Message me, my Texas Desert Rose Facebook page. Let me know what you think. I would love to discuss it. I'd rather there be a disagreeing discussion than no discussion at all about these topics. So I'm going to entitle this, Forgiveness is About the Past. Okay, and what I'm not going to put on there, but you will hear me say a few times, trust is about the future. Let me explain. I have definitely been put in position in my life so far, I'll be 55 Christmas, to either hold on to my anger and my hurt and my betrayal and have it impact me for the rest of my life, or forgive and continue on. And it seems like life just continues to offer those opportunities. That's what life is about, right? I call it Earth School, or many call it Earth School. So I started out this life born on Christmas Day, and my father, who I am more than positive did the best he could, was in jail when I was born, and therefore my mom pretty much had to give birth on her own on Christmas Day. They had been married. In fact, I was conceived on their wedding night exactly. I think I was 2 weeks early, so right around 8.5 to 9 months, I was born. And to say that we lived a life of poverty would be overstating it. I attended many, many, many schools because we continued to get kicked out of our houses for not being able to pay rent. Life was up and down with my dad, to say the least. He was, we later found out, diagnosed bipolar 1, bipolar 2 psychotic features. And as a result of that was an extreme, very, very extreme alcoholic. And so needless to say, my mom was the one that always had the job and held down the income for the family. And pretty soon that family was, I was followed by 2 brothers, one 15 months later, and then another about 22 months later. And so a family of 5 is hard to manage on one income. My mom worked a life punching a clock at a factory, and she is the one that taught me my work ethic, because come heck or high water, she was always at work. Sometimes that was with 2 black eyes. Sometimes that was literally, a lot of times that was with no sleep at all. So to say the house was chaotic was, an understatement. Often we were kept up all through the night. And to this day, the impact on me is I cannot handle my sleep being disrupted. And I will budget, okay, what time do I have to go to sleep to get my 7 to 8 hours? I have to be rested and all that stuff. And so that's always been a huge issue because that was taken away. We often, me and my brother, slept in the same bed with mom, just to kind of be together and kind of put on all the fans so that it was quiet. Dad and his friend or friends in the other room, they would play, a lot of times he was in mania, so they would play Monopoly or whatever all night long and drink and drink and drink. So you can imagine it got pretty chaotic. Okay. There were, at the very least, emotional abuse. There was some sexual abuse, which I will go into a little bit in a bit. Definitely physical abuse. My father never touched me or my brothers that I know of, but he was pretty brutal with my mom. And of course, later on, they come up with this report, these studies that children who observe this, witness this, are just as damaged as if they were hit. And results being depression, anxiety. I've been diagnosed with generalized anxiety in general. And of course, we had never heard of things like empaths or extrasensory or extrasensitive persons or anything like that. So those didn't have labels. I just knew I was worried all the time and scared to death all the time for no reason at all. And that carried on well into my adult years, which we'll say more about that too later. So that kind of paints the picture of at least my parts of my childhood. Add on top of that, a bedroom fire that started an old fan, AC fan in the window. That's the AC we had. Me and my brother shared a room. And there was a bedroom fire when one of the cords shorted out. And luckily, my brother has allergies, and so he smelled the smoke and woke us up. We most assuredly would have burned in that fire. I think I was probably about 8 years old at that time, making my brothers 7 and 5. And so, of course, you can imagine that creates a little bit of anxiety as well. Like I said, many moves, many evictions from homes, hide because somebody's at the door trying to collect the rent. The neighborhoods that we lived in were not the best, as you can imagine. And therefore, some neighborhood kids, there was a lot of crime in the area that we lived in. And one boy wanted me to, quote unquote, be his girlfriend. And whenever I wouldn't, he ran over my cat's head with his bicycle. These are all, just one of these things is very traumatic for a child. But add to the fact that I'm the oldest, and so I kind of took the role of making sure my brothers were okay, and really even making sure my mom was okay. Mom was doing the very best she could, overworked, went to work no matter what, fear, constantly said, I'm going to get fired, I'm going to lose my job. And so that message was instilled as well in me. And I'm a typical, better now, but a typical workaholic who will work around the clock just to make sure everything is done. And I've got that message inside of my head, don't lose your job. And I knew it was endemic in my head because, I have my own business, own practice, and I still worried about that. I mean, there's always that impending doom that's there. So fast forward, when I was about 18, 19 years old, my father had finally used up his liver, cirrhotic. He died of cirrhosis. And my mom, they had been divorced about 7 years, and she had just remarried literally the month prior to my dad's death in 86. And so it was pretty much me and my brothers, and my dad was was bedridden in the hospital and in a coma for a week. My grandmother's there, my aunt was there, but ultimately it had to be me to sign the papers to take him off life support. If you can imagine, 18, 19 years old, being the one to sign those papers. And a little bit, another detail about the neighborhoods we lived in, there was a sexual molestation that happened by a neighborhood boy. He would later go on to do prison time for sexual assault of someone else. I never told anybody, really, and that's part of the reason why it's hard to do this, is that I'm putting some real hardcore stuff out there. But all under the topic of forgiveness is about the past. And I didn't want to come on here and say, hey, you should forgive, your enemies and forgive these people who have hurt you. I'll say more about that, but I definitely have my things that have happened to me. So when I say that, I'm not standing idly by and having had nothing happen. Okay. So yeah, the neighborhoods were very interesting. And my mom did the best she could to try to keep us inside so that we're safe. But ultimately, 3 kids need to be able to get out. So it was always, stay in the yard. But kids find each other, and a lot of the neighborhood kids would come by. Now, there were some wonderful, wonderful friends who were made out of those neighbors as well. One of my best friends, she's still my friend to this day since kindergarten, and I met her in that neighborhood. And so the many neighborhoods, we lived in the same neighborhood a few times and across the tracks in Denton. So there was a lot of beautiful people that came out of that too, but also some not so great things that came by. So fast forward, every big thing that's ever happened to me, I've had an intuitive sense about it. I would just have this sense in my gut that I was supposed to do it. One of those things was go to college. I had no idea how I was going to pay for it. I had never been on a college campus before, although there were 2, now there are 3 college campuses in my hometown of Denton. I had never been on the campus except in the summers to run around with my brothers. But I just knew I was supposed to go to college. And so I went to orientation. It was a week long with my friends, and I felt like I really didn't belong because my friends, they had their checks signed by their parents to pay for their tuition. And the week